So once again, welcome everybody to today's webinar, Influencing Your Health in a Chaotic World, where we're going to be exploring food, mood, and self-care. Before we start digging into our content, I should just let you know that if you need or want any captions, you can join or you can find the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And depending on the device, you might have to hover over the bottom of the screen, but you can turn on your closed captions if you so choose to. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Nikki Johnson. I'm a community health and nutrition specialist with a split appointment between the University of Minnesota Extension and North Dakota State University Extension, focusing a lot on chronic disease prevention, but also love all elements of health and nutrition. Joining me today, I've got three wonderful colleagues who will introduce themselves as well. Beth.
Yes, hello, I'm Beth Labenz, and I'm the place-based approach coordinator in the Family Health and Wellbeing department as well.
I'm Susie West, and I'm a health and nutrition extension educator. My primary areas of focus are on substance use recovery and nutrition, as well as food access.
And I'm Cari Michaels. I'm an extension educator in our family resiliency area, and my main area of focus is mental well-being.
So with that, our learning objectives today, what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about the socio-ecological perspective to identify factors that influence our mental health and well-being. We're going to talk about some of the interactions between mood and food intake and even decision making. We'll talk a little bit more about how culture and media support or detract from our self-care practices. And then we're hoping that by the time that you leave today, you can identify one self-care practice or healthy action to apply to your life.
All right, as we get started today, I invite you to join me in a mindful breathing practice. It's often called a 4-7-8 breathing. You might have done it or heard of it before. Mindful breathing can help ground us in the present moment. It can help us concentrate, and it's particularly helpful during times of acute stress. So if you're sitting, I invite you to sit upright with your back straight. And if you're standing, same thing, your back upright and straight, your feet resting on the floor. Move your shoulders back and down, and your body generally relaxed. We'll practice this 3 times, and I'll talk us through it. We will inhale for a count of 4 through our nose. Then we'll hold for a count of 7, and then we'll slowly exhale through the mouth for a count of 8. Usually, my slide is moving with us. I see that it's not right now. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So we'll wait for this to catch up, and then I will talk us through this. So get ready to inhale through your nose. Inhale. And hold. And exhale slowly through the mouth. Inhale through the nose. And hold. Exhale slowly through the mouth. And one more time. Inhale through the nose. And hold. And exhale slowly through the mouth. Okay, you can relax and breathe normally. Thank you for joining us in this practice. I have found that mindful breathing can be such a habit during stressful times that I automatically start doing it. So the more we do it, the more our body is just inclined to do it when we need it. It's a regular practice for me. I find it really calming, and it can prepare us for learning something new. So we will dive into our content here. I'm going to start with our changing narrative. People in different places and cultures understand mental health and mental illness, those terms, in different ways. We all have varied definitions and perspectives and language around mental health and well-being. Mental health is a cultural concept. We think about it differently depending on our families and our communities and what we were taught. In general, in the United States, we have experienced a shift in recent years in our general understanding of mental well-being. I'm going to occasionally put a question in the chat for you to just think about, maybe jot down so that you can reflect on this. And the question is, what messages have I learned about mental health and mental illness while growing up? And how have they changed? What changed them in your life? So we used to have an old narrative. This was actually based on a Frameworks Institute survey that was national. And they learned several things about how, in general, we think about mental health and well-being. And at that time, this was 2010, people felt that mental illness is exclusively a brain disorder, and specifically about chemicals, which are caused by genes, which are set in stone for life. The old narrative said that mental health is the same thing as mental illness. Those terms mean the same thing. That mental illness is a medical condition. It can only be addressed by a medical professional. And that medication then is the logical response for everyone. And treatment is designed to temporarily rebalance the chemicals in our brain. So there's no ultimate cure or healing for mental illness. And also the old narrative said that mental illness is a character flaw. There was no room for how environmental influences affect functioning. It said that mental well-being is the same as happiness only, about emotion, about feelings only. And then finally, that mental well-being is a choice, that people can make themselves better if they only try hard enough. And I see some of your comments in the chat about mental health not being discussed. That was certainly true for me. Seen as something abnormal, something other, something to separate us from. That was also true for me. And more stigma. I do think we are having much more open conversation about mental health and well-being now, which has helped us to understand the terms better. We've also had a lot of new research and new practices around mental health and well-being. So we have generally a new narrative. And this is based on work that the Minnesota Department of Health has done. And the new narrative says that brains are built through experience. So first, our brains are built. They're not static, as we used to think. And they change not only in the early years of development, but throughout our lives. And our experiences influence our brains and how they function, not just when we're young, but always. Changing our experiences in life can change our mental health and well-being. Second, fear, trauma, and chronic stress negatively impact our mental health. We can sometimes improve mental health by focusing on these. Also, the new narrative says that the environment where we live, learn, work, and play impacts mental health is really important for how we're functioning. Resilience is not enough in the face of oppression. Recovery isn't just about individual strength or grit. Promoting good mental health requires systematic intervention and prevention. The new narrative also says that physical health and mental health are intertwined. Physical health problems can increase the risk for poor mental health, and vice versa. We need to consider both to promote overall health. And I see another comment in the chat, thank you, about mental health being stigmatized. People weren't as open. There has been a shift, and I think COVID has helped that. It's a bit of a silver lining. I think a lot more people experienced anxiety. I know a lot more people experienced anxiety and depression as a result of COVID. And so there's a lot more conversation happening now. The new narrative also says that culture shapes our definitions and our understanding of mental health. Language, treatments, recovery, we're all different. And that matters. We need to understand mental health and well-being within the context of our culture. Positive relationships are central to mental well-being. They promote healing. We heal through relationship. Being socially connected is a necessary component of good mental health. Mental health happens in and through community. It's not just about the individual. We can understand mental health, measure mental health, and intervene in mental health at a community level, as well as individual or family levels. And then finally, mental health requires a sense of purpose and power in your life. We all need agency over ourselves and our well-being. So one way to view this complex nature of mental health and well-being is the dual continuum model of mental health, which was created by Dr. Corey Keyes, who was at Emory University. And he was the first person who really defined mental health and mental illness as being on two separate spectra. So those two terms don't mean the same thing. They don't mean opposites. They are on two different spectra here. So in this model, and everybody in the population falls here somewhere in this model, illness is shown on the horizontal axis with severe mental illness on the left and no mental illness on the right. So we're all on that spectrum somewhere. And then functioning is shown on the vertical axis, from poor mental health functioning on the bottom to optimal mental health functioning on the top. And we're all on that spectrum somewhere too, all the time. And it's not set in stone. We move around depending on our life's experiences. So what this shows us is we have people in quadrant 1, and those are people who at the time experienced good mental health with no mental illness. And we call that flourishing. There are people in quadrant 2 who have severe stress on their mental health with no mental illness, and we call that languishing. People in quadrant 3, severe stress on their mental health with a mental illness, languishing with a mental illness. And then people in quadrant 4 who have good mental health functioning with a mental illness. So they are flourishing in spite of the fact that they have a mental illness. And this way of looking at mental health and mental illness reminds us that a person can experience a significant struggle without illness. Those are the people in quadrant 2. Or they can experience good mental health with illness. Those are the people in quadrant 4. And sometimes we forget about that. And then it also introduces the idea of mental flourishing, which is everybody in the top half. So I'm a public health educator. I'm not a clinician. So I'm not really working with people who have illness necessarily, although I am helping everybody to move up toward flourishing, whether I'm working with individuals or families or organizations or communities. I want to help people flourish. So I have another question that I'll put in the chat, and I know there are some comments there too that I will review now too. So this is a question for reflection. Jot a note down to yourself if you'd like. Where are you on the dual continuum? What are signs that you are not functioning your best? And then what typically helps you to feel better? And I'll answer this for myself. I experience some anxiety. So I will put myself on the left-hand side of that vertical line, and I function really pretty well. It doesn't affect my daily life or functioning. So I'm putting myself in quadrant 4. There might be times that I dip down a little bit, but overall, that's where I picture myself. And it's helpful for me to keep this model in mind when I'm thinking about my own flourishing. Might be doing okay, and there might be things I could tend to help me flourish a little bit better. So I see a couple of comments in the chat. Yeah, I agree. The comment about the term mental health or mental well-being is generally accepted and supported, but we don't have resources to help people help themselves. And that adds to our stigma. We just don't have, people aren't equipped and don't have the resources to help themselves flourish. So we have a long way to go. We have a lot of systemic changes to make. And then another comment about OCD and anxiety in your family and not people not talking seriously about it. Yeah, it's a hard thing in families, and I experience some of that myself. And when it's not discussed, it's even harder. So I appreciate you sharing that comment. So what is mental flourishing? We're going to help everybody move up. We have to know what that means. According to this new narrative and our newer understanding of mental health, we need something beyond good feelings to be mentally well. We know that. There are several measures of mental well-being or mental flourishing now, and I'm using those two terms interchangeably. I'll show an overview of a scale also by Dr. Keyes, and the other scales that exist out there now are similar. And this says that to flourish, we need both positive emotions and positive functioning. These are the things that pull us into a healthy and engaged life. So first, to flourish, we need an emotional component, which means that you are generally feeling well. You're mostly happy, calm, mostly satisfied with your life, mostly interested in your life. Second, we need a psychological component, which means that you are functioning well as an individual. You have warm or positive relationships. You like yourself and your personality, or have a sense of self-acceptance. You have a sense of identity or purpose. You believe your life has meaning. You strive for personal growth. You're able to adapt your environment to meet your needs, and a sense of self-direction or autonomy. And third, you need a social component, which means that you're functioning well with other people. In general, you believe that people accept and care about one another. You believe that society is improving for people like you. You have a sense of community or connectedness. You contribute to society and you believe your contribution is useful. And then finally, you find engagement with people meaningful, or you have a sense of social coherence. That's a lot. We don't need to have all of those things to be considered flourishing, but the scale says we need one of the emotional components, and we need 6 either psychological or social components. So we're all, varied in this as we go through life, but we need some of these components, emotional, psychological, and social, in order to be flourishing in life. And I'm seeing one more comment here. Question about changing the name. Health Partners changed their name of their mental health department to behavioral health. Why would they change it? I don't have the definitive answer on this. I do know that there has been a great deal of stigma around the term mental health. And that's actually why I use it, because I'd really like to make it more commonplace. But I also know some of the behavioral health departments are changing back. So I think there's a pendulum and it reflects how we're thinking about certain terms, but I don't know exactly why those decisions are made. I do know people are much more open to using the term mental health, mental well-being, mental illness, mental flourishing now than they used to be. So I'm going to pass this over to Susie at this point.
Okay, so as Cari has mentioned, a lot has changed in the way that we think about mental health versus mental illness. You can be mentally healthy and also have a mental illness. You don't necessarily have to have a mental illness to be not doing so hot with our mental health, right? And the same is true for a lot of different areas of health. As we're going to jump into thinking about nutrition and culture, a lot of times we hear about health in this binary way, right? Like if you're not sick, then you're well. You have your mental health versus your physical health. There's, you have individual problems, and those are not related to your community's health. Us versus them, this kind of a lot of like good versus bad food, toxic versus clean. And that's, really not the case. Health is really complicated when we're thinking about our individual health, our societal health, and how a lot of different components interact together to ultimately support or make those things more challenging to achieve. And so we're going to be diving into a little bit of that in this next section, but wanted to talk a little bit too about this whole idea of flexibility versus rigidity. Health is super complex, and a lot of health messaging often falls into absolutes. Again, good, bad, yes, no, eat this, not that. Do this for your mental health, don't do that. Take this up, lots of that, oversimplified and very one or the other. There's a lot of nuance to health and a lot of complicated factors that go into it. And flexibility, both in the way that we interact with ourselves and with others, and how we handle our physical health and our mental health and our social health, requires flexibility and rigidity can be really a sign that we're maybe stuck. And just also want to reemphasize that human bodies and human brains are built for change. Literally change over the course of your lifetime. Like Cari mentioned, brains are built. They change all the time. Our experiences and our environment interact to shape the way that our brains work. And that ultimately has an impact over our health. I'm going to pass it over to, I think, Nikki.
Thanks, Susie. So as Susie just mentioned, our health is complex, and there's a lot of different things that come into play that really affect our mental health as well as our food choices. So to kind of get us thinking about that connection of food and mood or our mental state, we've got a question for you. We're going to add it to the chat here. And I see we've got a couple of thoughts are already rolling in, but we're kind of curious, how does your mood affect your food choices? And you can think about all different times, maybe when you're stressed or anxious, perhaps when you're happy or even excited. How does your mood affect your food choices? And feel free to add it into the chat. We'd love to see some of your thoughts here. But if you're more comfortable with just taking notes for yourself, that's absolutely fine too. I see a couple, okay, I'm a stress eater. I tend to eat my feelings. Maybe I'll ask a follow-up question or to all of you who might feel that way. What types of foods are you choosing when you're feeling stressed? Or when you're eating maybe more, or you're wanting to eat your feelings? What types of foods are those? Okay, they're going very quickly. I'm trying to read one and then all of a sudden it's moved. Okay, I tend to choose unhealthy options when I'm stressed, junk food, sweets, maybe wanting sugar. I want chocolate when I'm afraid or worried. Okay. I also reward myself with chocolate when I do something well. Yeah, I get that too. Stressed or bored, tend to lean towards junk food. Okay, I'm seeing a theme here, maybe a little bit. Before I go to the next question, I guess I'm curious, how about when you're feeling really happy or excited? Does that affect your food choice in any way? When you're feeling really good, you're comfortable, you know, life's going just the way you want it. How does that affect your food choices? Why is there eating decisions when I'm happy? Okay. Silly junk food, that's okay too. I choose more, lost it. I choose more whole foods when I'm happy. I eat healthier when I'm less stressed and have been exercising. Okay. Tying in some of that physical health too. I'm motivated to eat healthier when I feel positive. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that are, or a lot of different feelings that can affect our food choices. And depending how we're feeling can really impact that. So for example, if we're having those mental health struggles, it can make eating well or eating a certain way just feel that much more difficult. Or if we're feeling anxious, that might mean that we can't eat at all, right? It just kind of diminishes our appetite, or maybe we even feel physically ill. On the flip side, you know, when we're feeling more relaxed or comfortable, we might be able to take the time to cook a homemade meal, something that has different types of nutritional aspects than, you know, some of our stress eating foods would. So let's tag on to that previous question. So we talked about maybe how we're feeling can affect our food choices. I'm curious as to what affects your mood then. What affects your mood or how you're feeling? And again, feel free to add it to the chat. Thanks, Beth, for throwing the question in there. What affects your mood or how you're feeling? Workload, stress, sleep, social conflict, social engagement, people, so those relationships, who you're with, busy schedules, amount of daylight. Oh, I love that addition in there. Finances, housing market, the food I eat. Ooh, Danielle, you're doing some foreshadowing into a question a little bit later. Allowing myself to make a quote unquote bad food decision. Guilt or shame created when we feel the food we choose is not the best, sleep. So there's a whole lot coming into play here, right? There's a lot of different things that can affect our mood, as we have seen in the chat, and there's probably hundreds of thousands of things that we weren't able to list here just because we don't have time. But we're going to dig into some of these things that might affect our food or our mood choices, or excuse me, our food choices or our mood, or maybe even both. So I'm going to turn it over to Cari, Beth, and Susie to share a little bit more about those various factors that come into play with our mental health and our food choices.
Okay, so this is a socioecological model, and this shows the many levels of influence and the complex relationships between layers of influence on an individual. So the individual sits in the center, and they live and work and play within relationships, within organizations, within communities, within policies, and within a society. This is a helpful way to consider how we can understand and support the decisions we make, our food, our mood, as we move through our lives, and especially as we move through the more chaotic times. We often tend to overemphasize the individual's risk and protective factors. For example, we say, well, that person isn't feeling well. Do they have healthy habits? What genetic factors might predispose them to mental illness? Is that what they're experiencing? How well do they handle stress? Are they making the right food choices? We think that an individual caused their own mental health struggle and that they're solely responsible for their recovery. But individual mental health is affected by whether they ate today or slept in a safe and comfortable place last night, or have safe and supportive relationships, or have experienced poverty or inequality or discrimination. So there's a lot of things to consider when we think about a person's health, their mood, their food choices, their mental functioning. And Beth will now talk us through a little bit on each layer of this model.
Yes, thank you, Cari. So one of the biggest things that I want to talk about today is that this model can describe mental health, but it can also describe how we interact with food in our environments and in all those different levels. So what the biggest level that we have on this chart is the societal level, or society. And one of the things that I really talk a lot about in my work is about stigma and bias. So stigma and bias can occur in several ways on this level. Oftentimes we know in America and in our culture, and especially Western society, we have a really big weight stigma and a weight bias. Being overweight is not something that's seen as ideal. That can cause even more shame when people are trying to control eating habits and trying to make sure that they're feeling like they're having a healthy, quote unquote, life, kind of like what Susie was talking about later with those binaries earlier with those binaries. Also, there can be bias and stigma around people that need to access food in different methods, such as going maybe to their local food shelf or asking for help when they don't have enough food in their cupboards to eat healthy. So those stigma and bias can occur on the societal level for sure. Another thing that we often don't have control over on an individual level is those economic conditions. I know right now everybody on this call knows that grocery store prices are really high. When you shop for groceries, inflation is pretty high right now. And I think that that's something that often we don't think about as affecting our health or affecting us on an individual healthy level. We also have some environmental changes. Environmental experiences can be like where you're at. I saw a lot of people that said work. So those environment can be physically where you are at and where those stresses can occur. It could also be bigger level for environment, like if there's a drought or if there's a flood, these changing weather patterns, that can also be something that really affects food access and prices of food, such as if there's a huge freeze for the orange fields and then there's the price of oranges skyrocket and you can't buy healthy citrus for your family in the winter because you can't afford it. We also have really big things like oppression, racism, discrimination, stereotyping. All those things also impact how we access food. Just by having all those constant stressors, just by being BIPOC or being a person that maybe is considered marginalized in our society, that can cause like that toxic stress that really impacts on how you're feeling on a day-to-day level. It can also even change our DNA so that we feel like maybe we are more susceptible to some of those health-related diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure. And those also can really impact our access to food. We've probably, a lot of people on this call have heard like where your zip code is really affects your access to healthy foods. It affects how close you are to a grocery store. Those are all things, yes. Intergenerational trauma, as Susie put in the chat that someone mentioned already too, those are all really big societal changes. And one of the other things that we're going to talk a little bit more on the next slide is media and social media and messaging. Obviously, we all are exposed to media or social media of some kind, even if you're not part of the social media culture. If you're not on Facebook or Instagram every day checking out social media, you're still being influenced by it as a societal level. And there's a lot of misinformation that occurs online, as we all probably know by now. But there's a lot of diet culture, body image, health trends. There's a lot of filters and timing issues that don't always portray reality. Sometimes people can post a picture and maybe really like suck in their stomach in one picture, and the next picture they're really sticking their gut out and they say that they had this huge change because they ate this or drank this certain thing for 3 weeks straight and all their life problems were fixed. So we have to be careful about misinformation that occurs. There's a lot of people that are making money off people buying diet foods or diet pills, anything diet related on the internet, and that generally they don't have your best interests at heart. Generally, that's a good rule of thumb. If they're asking you to buy something, they probably don't have all the answers. Also, social media lacks a lot of nuance, so sometimes they're not telling you all the stuff that they did besides take this specialty. They also had a personal trainer, especially like celebrities or people that really are influencing a lot of large people, a lot of large amounts of people. So I think that that's something that we have to be careful of as well with social media. And so one of the remedies that we'll talk a little bit later about as well, but is to follow some of those licensed professionals or surround yourself with positive media when possible. So if you're feeling like, oh, this person that I follow, I really don't enjoy what they're talking about, I don't enjoy what they're saying, just click on follow. Just don't have those types of people in your life, and really be cautious of what kind of messaging that they're giving, and making sure that you're following licensed professionals like dietitians, doctors, people that really are authentic professionals. All right, so the other layer that we're going to dive down deeper into is the policy. So I am a self-proclaimed policy nerd. I have my MPH in policy. So I think that policies can greatly influence how we interact with food. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples here. I won't bore you too much. But the government investment of time and money and resources greatly impacts on how we access food. So you may have heard that next year Minnesota is going to offer free school lunches. That is a huge policy decision. That's one of those big P policies that's coming straight from the state legislature to help influence how kids have access to food when they're at school. We also have things like SHIP, or the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership, which is something that is in Minnesota, and that takes place across the state to help improve some of those policies in local government, in local organizations, and local schools to really help influence access to healthy foods. We also have some government regulations and incentives. One of those that we also have in Minnesota is called Market Bucks. So if you are on SNAP or use EBT card to purchase groceries, you can also use that at the farmer's market. And this year they have tripled the incentive. So if you spend $10 on your EBT card, you get $20 back in Market Bucks, so that you can spend that at produce at the farmer's market. We also have some decisions about laws, policies, and regulations and resources. Some of those things include things like the SNAP EBT funding. Are they going to increase it, decrease it? Or are they going to expand what people can purchase with that money? Or are they going to slash and make cuts? We also have things like WIC, which is the Women, Infant, and Children program that is specifically made for women to access healthier foods who are either pregnant or have infants. All right, so I will turn it back over to Susie.
Well, I'm going to be covering a little bit of communities here, and in my community, in my office, some people just came in, so hopefully it won't be too loud in the background. But our direct environment, our communities, the places that we live, work, and learn and play also influence our health and our health behaviors and decision making. thinking about things like housing stability, housing affordability right now, out of control. That is going to have a major influence on our health, where we're able to live, our neighborhoods, our access to green space, which is really linked to mental health. Are you able to walk safely through your neighborhood? Is your house itself, does it have a lot of mold, or does it have pests in it? That's going to influence our health as well. Thinking about equitable and healthy environments, and how that impacts our food access and our food choices. There's some interesting research coming out of the U of M around folks who are food insecure, experiencing food insecurity, and how that influences food choices, how that might influence fruit and vegetable selection and consumption, how that gets passed down, intuitive eating or disordered eating, kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum here, how that can be learned in our environment, whether that's in our direct home or in a larger community in general. Built environment, walkability, all these social connections, social capital within our communities really impacts our mental health, our access to food, and what that looks like.
All right, so next we have organizations. So all those communities are made up of individual organizations that help people access healthier foods. One of those big organizations that you might think of this time of year are farmers markets. So farmers markets are able to provide a lot of fresh produce, also support local farmers, and also have a lot more nutrients because they're picked locally and able to be sold right away. So those tomatoes get red and they're not picked when they're green and then shipped for 2 weeks and are losing nutrients as soon as they're picked. So farmers markets are a great resource for accessing those healthier foods. But we also have educational opportunities. I know that Kim mentioned that you have to have education around all these policies. That includes education around policies, but also includes education about cooking. I know in Extension, we do a lot of cooking classes. We do a lot of nutrition classes. So making sure people are comfortable with cooking with new types of produce and new healthier foods. That's also something that is important to make sure that people are aware of organizations, but also know how to access that food. So the second one is access, and I know that Susie talked a lot about access in the last one about food access, but we also have access to things like transportation, childcare. Those are all really important to continue that access within organizations as well. So if you're an organization that's maybe supplying healthy foods like at a food shelf, but you don't allow kids because you don't want the noise and the stress of kids at the food shelf, maybe that's not really accessing enough food to families who have children and don't have childcare and can't just run to the food shelf without their kids. So that's something to consider as well within those organizations. Also, cross-sector collaboration is also super important to make sure that these organizations aren't just trying to do everything by themselves. We're always stronger when we work together. And I think that a lot of organizations are connecting through food access networks across the state, which is a way to kind of really share resources, share collaboration, and make sure that people have access to all the same resources within a community from all these organizations. The next one is relationships. And I know a lot of people talked about relationships as a trigger for maybe not eating so healthy, maybe a stress trigger earlier when we had that in the chat. So I think that this is a really important one that can either make or break how you're eating healthy or how you're relating with others. So one of the things is the social connection with family and peers. So sometimes social connection can mean that you are really engaged with your family and really like maybe you're really concentrating on working out and eating healthy, and you're doing it as a family, you're going for a family walk after you eat a healthy dinner, that really can have a positive influence. But then you can also have those family members and that social connection where you get together and they convince you to go to a restaurant that maybe doesn't have the healthiest choices, or they really are kind of that stress trigger in your life too, and then it causes you to do some of that stress eating that we talked about earlier in the chat. We also have family meals. So family meals are something that has been proven. There's been a lot of research that family meals, like when you sit down together, have a meal together, it's going to be a lot healthier than if you go out to eat or go through the drive-through or have some of those convenience meals. So family meals can really influence your overall health of your family and support as well. I know that Cari has done a lot of research on support after you have a baby, and that's something that I think a lot of families or if you don't have that support system and you don't have someone to bring you meals and bring you healthy meals and make sure you're drinking your water and really like engaging on you in those moments when you're probably not feeling your best. And that can be the same in mental health. So if you maybe are having some you're in one of those lower quadrants where you're just not flourishing at the moment because of mental health or because you're having some stresses in your life, that support system can really help you stay on track and really help bring healthier foods or make sure that you're eating when you don't feel like you want to eat. They can really help influence and really help guide us in our healthy eating. And then it brings us all the way back down to the individual. So we're going to talk through a little bit more about individual steps that we can do within our own life to really influence, because a lot of those things that I've talked about before, we don't have a lot of influence over. You maybe will have some influence, but not as much as individual level. But we really wanted to talk through all the levels so you are aware that it's not just about your individual choices. We are part of a bigger system, which can be overwhelming at times. But we want to talk through some of those individual steps that we can do. And one of the things that really is something that we don't have a lot of influence as well is the biological and genetic factors. So just because of your genetic makeup, you might be more influenced to gain weight or lose weight more easily. Also, you have more influence on your stress response. So depending on how your individual genetic and biological makeup is. But we're going to talk a little bit more about some other individual changes that we can make in the next few slides. But I just wanted to quickly show this as more like that zoomed out socio-ecological model. So you can see that this would be in a perfect world. In a perfect world, if all of these things existed, so if we didn't have stigma, we didn't have poverty, we had a lot of government resources, a lot of resources in general, we didn't have disparities, we had research, we had housing stability, and then we had local services and support. We had those cross collaborations between organizations, we had trained providers, and we had those relationships that were supportive, and we were able to do some self-care. We would all probably be in perfect health and we would all be eating really healthy and not being influenced by all of those different layers that sometimes can feel overwhelming. So this would be like the perfect world if all those socio-ecological models were lining up the way we wanted them to. But unfortunately, this isn't the world that we always live in. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some self-care in the next few slides. So I'll turn it back over to Nikki.
Thanks, Beth. So this might come, maybe it's surprising, I don't know, but we make over 200 food decisions in a single day. You know, what we're eating, when we're eating, how much we're eating, who we're with, where we're eating. And just as we saw on some of our previous slides here, there are a lot of different factors in our lives that influence our food choices as well as our mental well-being. So with that being said, though, oftentimes food kind of feels like that controllable factor. It's something that we maybe have a little bit more of a say over. And so while we've already talked about how our mood might affect our food choices can also affect our mood. So I always like to say food and mood, it's a two-way street. So we've got a question for you. How does food affect your mood? We're flip-flopping things. I think somebody mentioned kind of right off the bat that their food can affect how they feel as well. How does your food choices affect your mood? And I'll give everybody a little time to noodle on that. Okay, it can affect your blood sugar for sure. And that can absolutely play a factor in how we're feeling. If I eat more junk food, oh, now you guys are all flowing in here. I usually feel very tired. If I eat more healthy choices, I have more energy. So it can affect our energy level. Certain foods like sugar can bring you up and, you know, gives you a little bit of energy right away, but it's a quick fall. Absolutely. Eating my favorite foods makes me feel good in the moment. Oh, Mary, I'm so glad that you shared that. Absolutely. Sometimes there's certain foods that bring us comfort, right? It makes us just feel better. Maybe it's a bowl of hot soup on a really, really cold winter's day. Or maybe it's grandma's recipe, her favorite hot dish recipe, right? And it just kind of, it brings back some of those feelings of times maybe when we're feeling a little bit better. So it can provide us comfort. Susie, you get hangry, okay? So get a little bit angry if we're not eating our food or whatever it happens to be. Okay, chocolate makes us happy. Sometimes food can be a mood booster. You can feel good and energized or bad and sluggish, right? And when we think about how a food affects our mood, it's going to be different for every single person, and it's going to be different in every single situation, right? There's going to be some days where you're like, okay, I need this bowl of ice cream. That's what's going to make me feel good in this moment. But maybe you realize after you had that gigantic bowl of ice cream, your stomach was upset. You overdid it. It was just a little bit too much. You might change up how you respond or what foods you choose the next time when you're seeking something comforting. You want to choose something, right, that's not going to upset you any more than maybe what you already are. So again, food and mood, it is a two-way street. Our mood can affect our food choices, and vice versa, our food can affect our mood.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of frame a little bit of this too in what is called the window of tolerance, which is just a fancy way of saying that there's a zone of like optimal functioning in between like really high stress and also like really kind of low, maybe sluggish, maybe not, like kind of disengaged or shutting down. In this, in that window, that river there is kind of what we call the window of tolerance. And think of it like a river. When you think about a river, when it's really narrow, what happens? Like there's lots of rapids and it might be moving really quickly and it might be kind of shallow. And if you've ever like gone tubing in a river, which I don't know, I moved here last year, so I am still learning things. But in Utah and in Eastern Oklahoma, we did a lot of tubing where you just like float down the river. And you might get to a point where the river is really narrow and it gets shallow and it's hard to navigate, dude. It's like, man, I'm stepping on sticks and I'm stepping on rocks trying to get through this. And that could be when our stress level is really high. Maybe when these bigger social structures are making it harder for us to make choices. When our window of tolerance is larger, when that river is wider, there tends to be maybe a little bit less rapids sometimes. Depends on the river, I suppose. But maybe there's more room to navigate around some of those challenges. Maybe it's deeper, so you're actually able to stay afloat, like this little unicorn floaty, instead of going crashing into the sides or stepping on rocks and hurting yourself. And it's kind of, like I said, this optimal range of functioning, and it's going to vary. Your window of tolerance is going to vary throughout the course of the day, and it's going to change depending on your life circumstances. Things like stress and trauma and really like amped up, antsy feelings tend to shrink that, and that's going to change how we interact with food. Whereas when our window of tolerance is larger, and some of you guys have already touched on this, when things are going good, I'm making healthy choices. I'm supporting myself with exercise. I'm honoring my hunger. I'm keeping on track of eating. I'm choosing healthy things that make me feel good. When our window of tolerance is expanded like that, it might be easier to make those choices. Again, when that window of tolerance is narrower, that river is short and quick and lots of rocks and sticks in the way. Sometimes we make choices that don't feel as good to us in the moment. Maybe we're eating fast food or whatever. At the end of the day, all of those things and how they interact are still helping us move through and get through the day, get through that river. And that was kind of all I have on that. I don't know why I said and, but I'm going to pass it off to Nikki.
And I'm going to turn it over to Nikki. Thanks, Susie. Yeah. So with that, we do want to talk a little bit about foods that we can eat that support our mental well-being. Now, unsurprisingly, foods that are good for our brain and our mental well-being are also foods that are good for our overall health, right? Shocking. The things that fuel our bodies and are really nutritious are also going to be good for our mental state. So when you look at the diagram shown here on the slide, you can see that there's a lot of examples of foods that are really rich in nutrients. You can see on the screen that we've got fruits, we've got vegetables, we've got whole grains, we've got beans and protein. Proteins especially that are typically lower in saturated fats and contain a lot of the good healthy fats like fish, seeds, and nuts. And all of these foods pictured here help to fuel our body. They provide us with calories for energy, which keeps us going, but they also contain really good quantities of other nutrients that support our wellness, such as vitamins, minerals, and even water. So all of these different foods support our overall health. And even though that these foods do nourish our bodies and our brains, there isn't one specific set recipe, of this perfect ingredients to give us optimum health. I want to say that again. There isn't one set recipe of these perfect ingredients to give you optimum health. Every single person, as I mentioned, is different. Every body is different. And at different times of our lives and different points of our day, we might need more of one thing than the other. So while all of these good and are supportive to our overall mental well-being and our physical well-being, there isn't some perfect recipe. We always encourage folks to listen to their bodies and choose foods that are going to make you feel good. If you're choosing foods that are making you feel good, it's always going to be helpful. Now, with that being said, there are limitations of food. So nutrition is a way, but not the only way to improve our health. You can do all of the right things, quote unquote, and still get sick or not cure the disease, okay? So there are limitations of food. We can choose the foods that are good for our bodies because it's going to be good for not only our physical well-being, but also our mental well-being. But a lot of times when I talk about choosing healthy foods, I encourage people to think about their lifetime, or their lifespan versus just a snapshot. Because I think sometimes when we're looking at just a snapshot, we get hyper-focused on the good and the bad. And remember, foods are not good or bad. There's some that might be a little bit more nutritious, but maybe we need that food for something else to make us feel comfortable. Grandma's recipe, right? It provides us that comfort. So think about our food choices and our nutrition in the lifespan. What did my week look like? What did my food choices look like over the month? Rather than, all right, today after lunch, I had 2 pieces of cake and a bowl of ice cream and a candy bar. That's not an accurate picture of my overall nutrition, right? That's just a snapshot. Don't get too hyper-focused on that. And as I already mentioned, just because food is good for us and can nourish us, just because you are eating, quote unquote, all of the right things doesn't mean that you are going to have perfect mental health or physical health. Again, we can't cure the disease just through food alone, right? There's a lot of factors that affect those pieces.
All right, and I just wanted to share a few things regarding self-care and food, as we have spent a lot of time funneling down through these larger systemic issues and influences over our individual health. I just want to point out that we're not going to self-care our way out of those structural and systemic issues. We just can't. We're not going to. However, self-care can take a lot of different forms and can help provide us some support in the moment to navigate when that window of tolerance, when that river is narrow and quick, right? So when thinking about food, there are a few different things that could be really big acts of self-care. Plan ahead if you know that there's a stressful event coming up. Explore what it would feel like to do some menu planning and meal prep ahead of time. That makes such a world of difference and it takes forethought and it takes time and practice to do this, but it can really reduce some of that mental load when it comes to food, especially in times of chaos and stressful moments. We're going to talk a little bit more on the next slide about some gentle nutrition and what that can kind of look like and how we encourage healthy eating in those really stressful times. But also think about adding some novelty to the way that you interact with food, whether that's trying a new food, like a new piece of produce from the farmer's market, trying a new recipe, or trying a new eating experience. If you typically eat in front of the TV, hello, I do that because I like to. Explore what it might feel like to disengage from that, to turn the TV off, maybe sit in a new area of your house. Maybe you don't have a dining room table. What would it feel like to eat dinner at the kitchen counter instead? Or one of the things that I love doing is just like kind of changing the ambiance of the eating experience, turning off overhead lights, big lights, right? Turning off big lights, and see how it might feel to eat by a window or to light a candle and see what that kind of feels like. Sometimes part of the stress around food can be mitigated by the ways that we're interacting with food in that moment. Also, self-care when it comes to culture. Beth has already touched on some of these, but like unfollowing people in online or in real life who are making you feel bad about yourself. Don't follow people that make you feel bad about yourself, please. Don't follow people who make you feel really confused and conflicted about food and nutrition. Try to follow evidence-based practitioners, set screen time limits. I have a little screen time reminder on my phone for Instagram, and it is a really good way to just kind of check myself and be like, okay, yeah, I have spent too much time on Instagram today. Also exploring anti-diet or body neutral, body acceptance, body positivity books, other media, social media accounts can really help kind of challenge some of this ingrained dichotomous thinking about weight stigma, and also the way that we feel about ourselves. And some of that internal dialogue might just do a little shifting when we engage with that kind of content. Or fat liberation or health at every size accounts as well can really kind of help us shift some of that. Also engaging in meaningful social connections and reconnecting with culture, with your culture, whether that's your ancestral heritage, whether that's like, I just moved back to the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois and have spent my entire adult life living in the Mountain West and in the South. And so coming back to the Midwest has been really interesting because I'm like, yeah, we got stuff, we got hockey, and we got cheese curds. And like, it's been really interesting kind of like re-engaging with my Midwestern roots and what that feels like. But also your culture doesn't necessarily have to be like where you came from. It can be culture that you choose, right? That could be culture like if you're really into a book series, if you're really into Star Trek, finding different ways to create meaningful social connections and engage with a larger culture can be really impactful for your overall health. Oh, Nikki's giving me the warning. Okay, gentle nutrition during small windows. Thinking about how we can sprinkle in extra nutrients and what that might look like. Adding frozen or canned veg to fruits and vegetables to boxed or frozen meals. Alternatively, adding frozen proteins to pre-prepared like salads and that kind of thing. Do that all the time. Easy squeezy. Ordering a side of fruit or a salad with takeout or at the drive-through. It doesn't even have to be that you eat it right then. You might put it in the fridge and have it later or have it the next day. Pairing a less nutrient-dense item with a more nutrient-dense item. Something like pairing chips with carrots, adding some fresh fruit to your ice cream, exploring what some of those pairings might feel like. When you might be somebody who engages in overeating, or you're somebody who engages in undereating, or you just don't have any appetite when you're stressed. Trying practices like mindful eating in that mental flourishing toolkit that there is a mindful eating exercise. Explore what it would feel like to reattune to hunger cues, paying more attention to our bodily signals, eating regularly. Sometimes that might mean that we have to set a timer on our phone to remind ourselves to eat regularly. And instead of thinking of specific foods, consider textures, temperature, flavor profiles that sound appealing, and kind of go from there, whether that's like, I want cold, crispy, fresh, spicy. Maybe that means I want a salad with buffalo chicken on top. That could really fit that need, and that might sound really good to me in the moment. But I also have noticed in the chat a lot of like dichotomous language and food shaming and moralizing ourselves in regards to the foods that we tend to pick when we are stressed. And I just want to encourage you guys to try challenging how you interact with food in those moments. What might happen or how might you feel if food was morally neutral? Instead of grabbing a bag of Cheetos and considering, oh my gosh, I can't believe I ate that junk, what would it feel like to say, man, those Cheetos were really a quite delicious snack in the moment. Man, that cake was really delicious and really hit the spot. What might it feel like if a bad food decision was just a decision related to food that you made in the moment because you didn't have a lot of room in your window of tolerance to make a different one? That's okay. So just want to encourage you to try challenging yourself when those things come up. And I know people have to leave and we're kind of over time, but felt like that was really important. Okay, using the model to support food and mood. You guys have given a lot of like great feedback in the chat. I want to leave you with one last question. How can you use, or how do you use resources in the levels of the socio-ecological model to support your food and nutrition? And what does that look like for you? I know we're out of time, but if you have a moment and you would like to share, that would be great. It might look like learning about foods and nutrition, might be asking somebody to help share the cooking responsibilities with you, making food for a social event, making a food from your heritage, or exploring what that feels like to re-engage with that piece of you. I know I just found out that I have some Polish in me. So last year I decided to try making pierogies for the first time, and that was really fun. Might look like finding community food resources, whether that's a food shelf, a community garden. You guys can share in the chat if you would like to, but you don't have to. Leave you with that to kind of ponder on as we wrap up.
So with that, that brings us to the end of our session. So just a couple of final details here. Beth added into the chat our evaluation for this webinar. And for this, you will be brought to a screen where you're going to want to select the Finding Balance series, where you can find our webinar, Influencing Your Health in a Chaotic World, Exploring Food, Mood, and Self-Care. As you complete that evaluation, there is a selection near the end of the evaluation where you can select that you want a certificate of participation. With that, you will also be able to request points for your UMN Wellbeing points if you need to do that. Just note that those Wellbeing points won't be reflected in your account for a little chunk of time. So don't expect it to happen overnight. It just takes a little bit of time. Additionally, we've got a couple more wonderful webinars with our department this month. We've got our Getting the Most Out of Your Visit to the Farmers Market, which will be held tomorrow, as well as 2 webinars in Spanish. In the coming weeks, we've got all about credit cards and how to prepare for the school year. And as always, we would love for you to engage with us in any way you would like. We really appreciate you joining us today. And just note that the recording, as well as some follow-up information, will be sent to you in a follow-up email later today or tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. I'm seeing in the chat that the link to the points is not working.